Good morning, people. I'll have to give a couple seconds for the Instagram to catch up as usual. So today will be the reading hour for June 13th, 2025. So I had to take a couple days off. I got banned from streaming on the backup Instagram account, so I had to make another one. Please follow Instagram / What American Left. All right, should be showing up live on Instagram now. Okay, here we go. So I will just get started with the Gladio doc again. So we left off talking about the last paragraph I had read was in 1954, British customs in Singapore stated that Bangkok had become the major center for opium trafficking in Southeast Asia. The drug trade became so lucrative that Thailand abandoned the anti-opium campaign it had launched in 1948. So profitable that the government itself actually gave up on fighting the drug war. So the next section here is intelligence subculture. General Fow developed a close relationship with Donovan. This is Wild Bill Donovan, the CIA agent. Let me pull up the chat here and make sure it's coming up. So General Fow had developed a close friendship with Donovan, who had been appointed U.S. ambassador to Thailand. So the CIA agent is moving up in the world due to this drug trafficking relationship. Indeed, Wild Bill became so enthralled with Fow that he nominated the Thai general for a Legion of Merit award. Although he did not win the award, Fow by 1953 had received $35 million in aid from the CIA, including gifts of several naval vessels and cargo planes used to transport drugs from Hong Kong, Singapore, and Marseille. These were given with the expectation that the KMT would launch guerrilla raids into China. WCC and Sea Supply, like Civil Air Transport or CAT, emerged from a subculture within the intelligence community of extremely wealthy and well-connected lawyers and businessmen who at the time were not part of any official government agency. Yeah, sometimes I just randomly think of that quote from, I want to say it was, I don't know if it was Wild Bill Donovan. It had to have been him. He was talking about why they recruited people. I should just actually find the quote in here. Well, I thought he was talking about a second story man. Basically, he was talking about why he would recruit wealthy, elite lawyers and people who were just like the waspy, high society, sort of like the monarchical families of the US. And I mean, aside from just like his own upbringing, it had to have been just that own personal bias, but like they are the people who have the most to lose, right? They have the most stake in the underlying, what would you call it, mission of the US government, like to keep communism at bay, to forward the goals of US imperialism. So this subculture would eventually give rise to a network of banks, including the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and proprietary businesses, including the American International American International Group of CV Star, which were created to support and conceal the flow of money from the heroin trade. So yeah, this entire like network of huge conglomerates and companies just for the purpose of money laundering. So they can conceal and hide all this money that they're making from this illicit drug trade. So this next section here, Cardinal Spellman's endorsement. Cardinal Spellman, I should also look him up. You should see what this guy looks like. This guy was, I'll just show you what this guy looks like here. So this will only be relevant, I'm sorry, for the people who are viewing the video portion of this, but he just looks like you would imagine a high up elite in the Catholic Church to look, who's complicit with the drug trafficking and Nazis, as long as it fights the commies. So anyway, back to Cardinal Spellman's endorsement. By 1958, the opium trade in Southeast Asia became so brisk that a second drug supply line was established by the CIA. This route ran from dirt airstrips within the Annamite Mountains of Laos to Saigon's International Airport, for transshipment to Europe and the United States. In addition to CAT, the CIA contracted the services of small Corsican airplanes for this transport. The Saigon drop would have been impossible without the cooperation of Ngo Dinh Diem, the president of South Vietnam, and Diem's brother, Ngo Dinh Nhu, who served as his chief advisor. Diem, a devout Roman Catholic, had been instructed by the Pope to cooperate with the strategies of the US government to thwart the gains of Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese. So imagine, you just are instructed by the Vatican themselves to say, you just have to deal with whatever drug trafficking is going on, whatever, murders, assassinations, any kind of, brutal atrocities against even your own people. It's necessary to keep the communists at bay, and if you're a good Catholic, you will tolerate and work with all of that. The cooperation was deemed so important by the Vatican that Cardinal Francis Spellman of New York formed a pro-Diem lobby in Washington. Through speeches and pamphlets, Spellman presented the people of Vietnam as a terrified throng, cowering before the cruel and bloodthirsty Viet Minh. The Vietnamese Independence Coalition led by Ho Chi Minh, the God-fearing Diem for salvation. And if you can draw a very easy parallel to the way that the average American thinks of Palestine. They think it's just this cowering mass of people led by this brutal dictatorship of Hamas, who are terrorists. And they think that anything that is being done by Israel and the US is being done regrettably, brutally, just to topple that regime. And they have this such childish, literally adolescent at best, narrative of geopolitics. And it's because they're heavily indoctrinated by liberal media. And that's why they also get personally and emotionally offended if you counter that narrative with facts, because politics for them are personal. Such tactics raised the ire of British writer Graham Greene, himself a devout Catholic, who dispatched the following from Saigon to London's Sunday Times. It is Catholicism which has helped ruin the government of Mr. Diem, for his genuine piety has been exploited by his American advisors until the Church is in danger of sharing the unpopularity of the United States. An unfortunate visit by Cardinal Spellman has been followed by those of Cardinal Gilroy and the Archbishop of Canberra. Great sums are spent on organizing demonstrations for the visitors, and an impression is given that the Catholic Church is occidental and an ally of the United States in the Cold War. On rare occasions, when Mr. Diem has visited areas formerly held by the Viet Minh, there has been a priest at his side, and usually an American one. The CIA provided millions in covert funding for Diem and his brother to expand the scope of their intelligence work, and to the extent of their political repression of the Vietnamese people. The support continued even after the corrupt Diem, whose government descended into chaos, was driven from office by a CIA-supported military junta in 1963. Crazy. Betraying their own assets. The CIA would never do such a thing. But yeah, you can see, again, this goes back also to it's a very popular and well-written chapter on the Vietnam War by Howard Zinn in A People's History of the U.S., how at no point was the U.S. interested in any semblance of human rights or even just life or liberty, anything for the Vietnamese people. It was always just about thwarting communism. And you can tell from what Ho Chi Minh was writing for what his people actually needed and was in line with human rights, what was actually going by the law, international law. And the U.S. ignored that and instead launched invasions to support the actual bloodthirsty dictators. Let's see if anybody's in the chat at all. So Saigon was now a city of strategic importance. This next section here is false flags and media control. As the Western world became increasingly inundated with heroin, the CIA, through spokesmen such as George White of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, the FBN, placed the blame on Chairman Mao and the People's Republic of China, who were accused of orchestrating the movement between 200 and 400 tons of opium per year from Yunnan to Bangkok. So how convenient is that? Once again, accusing China of doing all of the drug trafficking and importing all the drugs into the U.S. that you are obviously doing to fund your illegal operations to fight those communists. Does that sound familiar? Could you imagine if the U.S. were actually smuggling in a bunch of fentanyl to drug and profit from killing their own people in order to then use those illegal funds to then do some kind of like black operations that are militant that people don't know about. The agency also presented General Fowl, the linchpin in the Asian drug connection, as America's best hope in combating this drug menace. So the guy who's running the drugs, they're saying is their best hope in combating the drugs. Such reports represented the first unfurling of a CIA false flag. Knowing the importance of issuing such false reports, the CIA under Allen Dulles initiated Operation Mockingbird in 1953. This operation involved recruiting leading journalists and editors to fabricate stories and create smokescreens in order to cast the agency's agenda in a positive light. Among the news executives taking part were William Paley of the Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, Henry Luce of Time Incorporated, author Hayes Sulzberger of the New York Times, of course, the New York Times, Barry Bingham, Sr. of the Louisville Courier Journal, and James Copley of Copley Press. Entire news organizations eventually became part of Mockingbird, including the American Broadcasting Company, ABC, the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, the Associated Press, United Press International, Reuters, Hearst Newspapers, Scripps Howard, Newsweek, the Mutual Broadcasting System, the Miami Herald, the Saturday Evening Post, and the New York Herald Tribune. With over 400 journalists now involved, along with mainstream news outlets, the agency could operate without fear of exposure. So again, there's no indication that Operation Mockingbird ever ended, that the CIA ever stopped doing that. And then when you talk about, if you just even vaguely understand how big any of these media companies that I just read through were at the time, and then how media has only become concentrated under fewer and fewer umbrella corporations since then, you can imagine that there are no American media outlets that do not cooperate with the CIA to verify their headlines before they're publishing them. That is simply how it works. Like, any ideas you have about American media not being state propaganda are childish. The Catholic connection. To aid in the process of washing the billions from the heroin trade, the CIA worked in tandem with Henry Manfredi, who established the FBN's first overseas operation in Rome in 1951. Manfredi had established close ties to Monsignor Giovanni Battista Montini, then the Vatican Undersecretary of State, and later Pope Paul VI. Sorry, I'm not great with Roman numerals, you guys. Let me also check. Yeah, I'm at 12 minutes, so I'll go on this one for 8 more minutes. Through Montini, the FBN arranged to divert the flow of cash, at first through the Merrill Lynch brokerage house, and eventually through a host of parochial banks in Italy, before it finally arrived at the IOR. And so they're just moving the money around so it can't be traced very easily, like the essence of laundering. The transactions were supervised by Massimo Spada, a senior official at the Vatican Bank. Spada, a Knight of Malta, chaired or served on the boards of the astonishing array of companies owned by the Holy See, including Società Italiana per il Gas, Italy's central source of natural gas. No, how do you say gas in Italian? Do they just say gas? Italy's central source of natural gas, Riunione Adriatica di Securita Insurance Company, Istituto Bancario Italiano. These are terrible. My Italian's really bad. You'd think I'd be able to do that. Basically, a conglomerate that owned the Italian shipping line, Alitalia Airlines, Alfa Romeo, and Italy's telephone system. Okay, so that's Finsidere, is a conglomerate that owns all those things, along with producing 90% of Italy's steel. For assistance in managing the billions, Spada turned to tax attorney Michele Sindona, a leading figure in the Sicilian mafia. Interesting. So basically, they're just describing how they have all these connections to every major Italian company that has any influence in the culture, any significant net worth. They're using them as like a money laundering operation, basically. So this next section here is presenting Sindona. This is Michele Sindona from the Italian mafia. So a peasant from Patti, Sicily, Sindona earned his degree in tax law from the University of Messina in 1942. Following the Allied invasion, he abandoned his practice to become a leading figure in the black market, delivering lemons to the rural areas of central Sicily and trading them for wheat and other commodities that were in short supply in Palermo and Messina. This venture required the protection of the mafia, which controlled the produce industry and the border guards. Through the intervention of the Bishop of Patti, who had close ties to Vito Genovese, Sindona was able to gain this protection. The bishop used his influence with the Sicilian dons and the U.S. military officials to provide Sindona with fresh produce, forged papers, and safe passage through the country. Hmm. Yeah, literally, it's just like all mafia from like top to bottom. Like the way this is working, like you just have connections. You can forge any document. You can traffic whatever you want, make untold amounts of money doing it, and as long as you have the right connections. Sindona used a portion of his profits to purchase arms from the Allied military government, which he then provided to Salvatore Giuliano and other members of the movement for the independence of Sicily. By the end of the war, Sindona had become a respected member of the Luciano Don Carlo crime family and one of the Sicilian mafia's leading financial advisors. Between 1952 and 1955, he spent a considerable amount of time in New York, acting as Luciano's emissary to Vito Genovese. By 1955, he had also become a CIA operative, providing a steady flow of black funds to leading Catholic dignitaries, including Giovanni Montini, who had by now been appointed Archbishop of Milan. So all these people are just like rising up in the ranks because they're continuing to make all this money for their organizations, uh, whatever else they're doing, all these illegal operations. It's literally just like the mafia. Like as long as you are bringing in money and continuing to conduct the operations that they need done, you're going to continue rising and having more power. Montini, in turn, introduced the ambitious young lawyer to Massimo Spada. Sindona now formed an integral part of the nexus between the CIA, the mob, and the Vatican, and he would come to play a crucial part in a chain of events that would result in the toppling of governments, wholesale slaughter, and widespread financial devastation. And honestly, what this makes me think is like if you are a far right, like anti communist leaning person, pretty much anywhere in the West, and you're still a loser, like you just have some kind of 9 to 5 job and you already have like all these correct opinions according to the culture, like the deep state wants you to have. They want you to be anti communist, Catholic, apparently, or just religious of some kind, like in the white Western way. They want you to hate people that are unlike you. If you already are just like following that agenda, like you genuinely believe it, and you're just still like working a 9 to 5 and you're not connected to some kind of deeper agencies, like doing something, I don't know, significant for that cause, like what are you even doing? Like how much of a fucking loser would you have to be? I'll go on for another section or two. Still got some time on this one. So, Chapter 5, The Secret Society. The faithful who enroll in Masonic associations are in a state of grave sin and may not receive Holy Communion. This is a quote from the Declaration on Masonic Associations. The Sacred Congregation of the Faith, November 26, 1983. Throughout the 1950s, hundreds of Italian clerics and members of the church's, quote, black nobility joined the mafia in support of Operation Gladio. Paolo Taviani, one of the founders of the Christian Democratic Party and the country's new Minister of Defense, became one of the commanders of the 622 stay-behind units in Italy. Each unit consisted of 12 to 15 troops, all of which were trained by U.S. and British forces at the Capo Mararju base in the northern tip of Sardinia. The units established 139 arms caches, mostly in northeast Italy near the Gorizia Gap, through which any Soviet invasion was expected to come. By 1955, ecclesiastical units of the stay-behind operation, known as Catholic Gladio, popped up in Friuli Venezia Giulia, a region of Italy bordering the communist bloc. Cardinal Giuseppe Siri and the Italian Episcopal Conference supervised its establishment. So the Catholics and the high-up Catholic, all the cardinals or whatever, like the Catholic administration, everything, the Vatican, they were involved in setting up all these stay-behind units, setting up these weapons caches, uh, these actual like militia units of people who would use them. And this is all supposedly in preparation for some expected Soviet invasion. But in the meantime, they of course still have them doing things. They are still conducting operations that are anti-communist in nature, anti-labor organizer, anti-anything left wing. These are not just going to go to waste. The Catholic units were led by Augustine Bey, or Bey, Augustine Bey, it's BEA. So the Catholic units were led by Augustine Bey, rector of the Pontifical Biblical Institute, Agostino Casaroli, his privy chamberlain, and Fiorenzo Angelini, master of pontifical ceremonies. These three clerics, who had been dispatched by the Holy Father, were soon joined by Michele Giordano, a diocesan assistant of Catholic Action. All four prelates were eventually were elevated to the College of Cardinals for their work in the clandestine undertaking. So once again, these people who are involved in all these like mafia-related operations are only climbing up the ladders and climbing up the ranks. All right, I'm going to bookmark this one here. I'm at 20 minutes for the Gladio book. Now I'll switch over to Western Marxism. I have to find my bookmark here. Sorry. Okay, so I had left off talking about, I'll just read like the last sentence. Some years later, Walter Benjamin built on the critique of, quote, obligatory military service that was at the heart of, quote, militarism, understood as, quote, the obligation of the universal recourse to violence as a means for punishing the ends of the state, or for pursuing the ends of the state, to proceed to a global condemnation without the appeal of the existing order. Quote, the last war revealed the infamy of which it was capable. In an early unfinished 1915 essay on Dostoevsky, Lukács, horrified by total mobilization, the military code, and the execution squads, defined the state as, quote, organized tuberculosis, and as organized immorality, manifested externally as the will to power, as war, as conquest, as vengeance. So this is the time, I guess, after World War I, we're talking the postmodern era, that people are imagining, I guess what he's trying to describe is this, where the idea of the state as inherent corruption, as inherently evil. Like there is no such thing as a state or state power that can be wielded in the interests of the workers. It can only be used to hurt humanity, to like pursue evil ends. Like that's the only thing that can be done. And people sort of, you can see how this forms in like the Western left mind. Like if they see state power, they immediately oppose it. And like this book said earlier, they only support the oppressed and the anti-colonial peoples so long as they are losing. And he compares them to the Christians who need poverty to exist. There was some Christians, like at some point, I think he called the Malthusians ones, who were like, they needed poverty to exist because otherwise it would invalidate their efforts of like charity. So continuing here with the book, quote, yes, says Bloch, quote, the state reveals itself as a discrete, heathenish, satanic coercion materiality. It was necessary to do away once and for all with this monster. Quote, may it have a Bolshevistic function for a time as a transitionally necessary evil. It is patriotic or chauvinistic pathos that feeds the, quote, militaristic state, the insatiable Moloch that devours men. And against this as well, Bloch breathed words of fire. Quote, the murderous coercion of universal conscription served not the nation as official ideology pretends, but the capitalist, quote, stock exchange, and the Hohenzollern dynasty. Except that together with the patriotic and chauvinistic pathos, the very idea of nation itself ended up being rejected as well. To the rhetoric of, quote, the native soil and the traditionalism of Vaterland are counterposed the truly Christian idea of humanity and medieval universalism, which know no national or state borders. National or state borders. The influence of anarchism is quite evident, just as it is evident in Benjamin, who, aside from denouncing obligatory military service, ended up identifying and jointly criticizing violence, law, and power. So yeah, exactly like I'm saying. Like you experience military horrors, you see them firsthand, or you lose people to them. And because of that horror, you associate everything the state does with that. Because it has that capability, you assume that that is the true nature of the state, and then everything leading up to that is just waiting to reveal that. And I think that's still what's at the heart of like the Western leftist mind, is just all opposition to power, and so therefore an inability to ever wield it, and then wondering why you're always losing. So back to the book here. It would be in vain to search for these anarchistic tones in the Marxist and communist movement that was forming in the East in the wake of the October Revolution. It is a difference whose foundations can be discerned already in the discourses of Lenin. During the war, with his eyes fixed on Europe, the great revolutionary repeatedly denounced militarization and total mobilization as, quote, military slavery imposed on the population. It was not only the front that was regimented by the code of war and terror. Quote, the rear was transformed as well, even in, quote, the more advanced countries, in, quote, cases of martial law for the workers. Written and published while the butchery of war was at its most furious and on the eve of the revolution called forth to end it, State and Revolution formulates the thesis that the victorious proletariat, quote, needs only a state which is withering away. It is the necessary but transitory evil that Bloch talked about. In another vein, Lenin defined imperialism as the presumption of being, quote, model nations and attributing to themselves, quote, the exclusive privilege of forming states. In other words, beyond its economic sacking of other countries, he characterizes imperialism by its political oppression of nations and hierarchy. The exploited and oppressed were branded as incapable of governing themselves or constituting independent states. The struggle to shake off the stigma was a struggle for recognition. It was about liquidating colonial subjugation to construct an independent national state. What inspired the revolution of colonial peoples was not the password of a state that is withering away, but a state that is being built. Interesting. So I guess he's still just trying to clarify here the difference between the Eastern and Western Marxists. And you can see, like, the Eastern Marxists have the pursuance of state goals, state power, militant force to get there, whereas, like, the Western Marxists abandon that immediately. There's actually, like, an old meme. It's the two guys in the studio, and they're, like, at the keyboard and looking at the monitor very intently. And the one guy says, yeah, that's useful. Abolish it. And the caption was, like, anarchists in the studio. It's basically how it is. Any kind of, like, state power, any kind of ability to enforce your will or your ideology upon others and actually build some kind of project by doing that has to be abandoned by anarchists. You have to always lose. Yeah, I guess the Instagram is not popping off. I don't know where people are viewing this, but it seems like someone is. I got at least 3 viewers. These will all be up on the YouTube afterwards anyway, so if anybody wants to follow up on the reading hours. So back to the book here. We can well understand the tones that resounded from the East. Take Sun Yat-sen. He had long lived abroad and searched for motivations and inspiration to help overthrow the dilapidated Manchu dynasty and found the first Chinese republic. He therefore can't be accused of xenophobia. However, he summarizes the thinking of the anti-colonial movement, including its communist faction. To preserve their privileged position in oppressed countries, as well as their supremacy over the world, the imperialist powers are advocating the doctrine of cosmopolitanism to make the world submissive and obedient. These do everything they can to discredit patriotism as something, quote, narrow and illiberal. Behind Sun Yat-sen's positions, as with the founding of the Chinese Communist Party, lie 2 events. On July 25, 1919, Lev Mikhailovich Karakan, Vice People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs, declared that Soviet Russia was ready to renounce, quote, all territorial and other acquisitions of the Tsarist Empire on Chinese soil, and to annul, quote, all unequal treaties that China signed under threats of bombardment and invading armies. That summer, the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First World War, transferred to Japan the privileges in Shandong that Imperial Germany had stripped from the Beijing government. A great wave of protest developed in China, the May 4th movement, from which emerged not a few of the leaders and militants of the Chinese Communist Party. By then, it was clear to all that the Western democracies, having waged war against the Central Empires, raising the banner of freedom and self-determination of peoples, would not hesitate to perpetuate the semi-colonial condition of China. Yeah, there's a lot to that too, just to stress that last part. For all of the talk of, like, spreading freedom and democracy, of being the opposite of the monarchs, like, it is very obvious that the US and NATO took over for the British Empire and kept up all the same interests and relations to whatever extent they were able. And anytime they were unable to do it, that's because of the will of, like, the people there who actually were able to win independence. That's pretty much the entire story of the last century and a half or so. The only hope came from the country and the movement arising from the October Revolution, to which Chinese communists looked, decided to put themselves to the test in the struggle for national liberation. As Mao Zedong put it, quote, "It was through the Russians that the Chinese found Marxism." Before the October Revolution, the Chinese were ignorant of Lenin and Stalin and did not even know of Marx and Engels. The salvos of the October Revolution brought us Marxism-Leninism. Hell yeah. Air horns for that. Yeah, I mean, that's just more fuel to the fire, like more ammunition to say that like Marxism-Leninism is the only way that successful revolutions and toppling of regimes, like actual dictatorial regimes, has ever been accomplished. And all of the other ones that you may think are serving that goal, that were like Western propped up or made revolutions, like those were the color revolutions. While he was occupied with the War of National Resistance against Japanese imperialism, which sought to, quote, subject all of China and to make the Chinese their colonial slaves, Mao recalled his first introduction, in the last years of the Manchu dynasty, to the cause of revolution. Quote, "In this period, I also began to have a certain amount of political consciousness, especially after I read a pamphlet telling of the dismemberment of China. After I read this, I felt depressed about the future of my country and began to realize that it was the duty of all the people to help save it." More than a decade later, on the immediate eve of the proclamation of the People's Republic, Mao recounted the story of his country. He invoked in particular the resistance to the powers involved in the Opium Wars, the Taiping Rebellion against the Manchu dynasty, and, quote, against the Qing, servants of imperialism. The war against Japan in 1894 to 95, quote, the war against the aggression of the Allied forces of the Eight Powers, following the Boxer Rebellion, and finally the Revolution of 1911 that broke out against the running dog of imperialism, the Qing dynasty. So many struggles, so many defeats. How to explain the overthrow which finally came about? Yeah, that's another like popular meme. It's like showing the map of China when Mao and the Communist Party and all their forces are like surrounded on all sides by everyone who opposes them, and they were still able to do it. And it's usually like that map, and somebody says like, "What would you do in this situation?" It really is an incredible accomplishment. So Mao observed, quote, "For a long time, the course of this resistance movement, that is, for over 70 years from the Opium War of 1840 to the eve of the May 4th movement of 1919, the Chinese had no ideological weapon with which to defend themselves against imperialism. Having no other choice, the Chinese were compelled to arm themselves with such ideological weapons and political formulas as the theory of evolution, the theory of natural rights, and of the bourgeois republic, which were all borrowed from the arsenal of the revolutionary period of the bourgeoisie in the West, the native home of imperialism. The Chinese organized political parties and made revolutions, believing that they could thus resist foreign powers and build a republic. However, all these ideological weapons, like those of feudalism, proved very feeble, and in their turn had to give way and were withdrawn and declared bankrupt. So basically, I guess he's saying they had to fast forward their understanding. In order to defeat imperialism, they had to learn what imperialism was and then learn what the next step was that defeats it, which is socialism. And they had no choice but to do this for their own survival. Continuing back with this quote, "The Russian Revolution of 1917 awakened the Chinese, and they learned something new, Marxism-Leninism. In China, the Communist Party was born, an epoch-making event. Since they learned Marxism-Leninism, the Chinese people have ceased to be passive in spirit and gained the initiative. The period of modern world history in which the Chinese and the Chinese culture were looked down upon should have ended from that moment." And unfortunately, it does take a long time for people to catch up, especially just culture, worldwide culture as a whole, let alone American and Western culture, which are specifically indoctrinated against having any kind of respect for Chinese culture, their accomplishments from Mao's revolution. But they're starting to learn about almost 100 years too late. If in the West, communism and Marxism are the truth and the weapon to end war and pull it up by the roots, in the East, communism and Marxism-Leninism are the truth and the ideological weapon to end a situation of oppression and being, quote, looked down upon by colonialism and imperialism. It is a project that began with the Opium Wars, even before the founding of Marxism-Leninism and Marxism as such. In 1840, Marx was still a university student. It was not Marxism that provoked the revolution in China. It was the age-old resistance, the ongoing revolution of the Chinese people that found and became aware of itself in Marxist or Marxist-Leninist ideology and put an end to colonial domination. A few days after giving the above-cited speech, Mao declared, quote, "Ours will no longer be a nation subject to insult and humiliation. We have stood up. The era in which the Chinese people were regarded as uncivilized is now ended." Hell yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you have that kind of oppression that you actually have been suffering, this kind of stuff rings true. Like Marxism, Leninism rings true to people. And it is not ringing true to people in the West who may claim that they're oppressed because their conditions are declining. They're not getting the benefits of super profits from imperialism that they were used to or were promised. Um, but they're not really feeling the oppression of colonialism. And so their efforts to build any kind of true Marxist party in the West are clearly not working. Let's return to the quote delegate from Indochina, who in 1920 spoke at the Congress of the French Socialist Party. When asking the party to join the Communist International, he still called himself Nguyen Ai Quoc, or Nguyen the Patriot. He did not see any contradiction between internationalism and patriotism. Indeed, the latter, in the situation in which Indochina found itself, was felt to be a concrete expression of internationalism. Some decades later, having become the leader of Vietnam, which at least in the North had begun to taste independence, Ho Chi Minh urged the young to commit themselves to study, calling on them as follows, quote, 80 years of slavery have diminished our country's strength. Now we must retrieve the heritage bequeathed to us by our ancestors. Will Vietnam achieve fame and glory? Will her people occupy an honorable place on par with other peoples of the 5 continents? 9 years before his death, on the occasion of his 70th birthday, while one of the most barbaric colonial wars of the 20th century raged in Indochina, Ho Chi Minh recalled his intellectual and political journey. Quote, at first, patriotism, not yet communism, led me to have confidence in Lenin, in the Third International. What led to such an emotional reaction were the appeals and the documents that had promoted the struggle for the liberation of the colonial peoples, emphasizing their right to constitute themselves as independent national states. Quote, the theses of Lenin on the national and colonial question aroused in me great emotion, enthusiasm, great faith, and helped me to see the problem clearly. In his testament, after having called his fellow citizens to the quote, patriotic struggle and to the commitment quote, to save the fatherland, Ho Chi Minh added up his balance sheet. Quote, with my whole life, body, and soul, I served the fatherland. I served the revolution. I served the people. Hell yeah. Yeah, I mean, you love to hear like actual Marxist leaders and revolutionaries describing their journey, how they found Marxism, Leninism, how they arrived at the conclusion that that was the only way they could really liberate their people, was to unite them with a coherent ideology that actually gave them instructions for how to overthrow their oppressors, and not only overthrow them, but like to build a replacement government that enough people would have faith in the prospect of to actually want to join that movement, to do something that seems as unobtainable and just like silly as trying to overthrow your government in the real world and then build a new one all within the span of a few years, knowing how oppressive it is. The only thing that can unite people in that goal is Marxism, Leninism. And you have to have people, not necessarily one individual, you need several people who have like coherent goals and understand the ideology enough to strive for it and build what it directs you to build. Because the directions are pretty clear. It's just a matter of having the will and the people there to do it. So this is section 4 or chapter 4, the money economy in the West and the East. Seen as a consequence of the imperialist contest for market domination and for raw materials, the capitalists hunt for profits and for super profits, but above all, quote, as a moralizing, quote, no, but above all, as a moralizing key, the product of the Auri Sacrifamus, accursed hunger for gold, rather than as a result of a determinate social system. The First World War aroused in the West a spiritual climate that found its most significant expression in Ernst Bloch. In his eyes, the transcendence of capitalism must involve, quote, liberation from the materialism of class interests as such, and the, quote, abolition of poverty, all questions of the abolition of poverty and all questions of economics. To that, not even the great revolutionaries have paid sufficient attention. Hmm. So yeah, that does sound just like pretty utopian. That sounds like the stateless, moneyless society that people describe when they think communism is that. When in fact communism is just the process. Communism is literally just the process of achieving liberation for the working class by doing away with the state oppression. Man does not live by bread alone. This is a quote from Block, I assume. Man does not live by bread alone. As extensively important as the external may be, and must be attended to, it still only suggests, it does not create. For human beings, not things, not their powerful process, outside of us and wrongly turned over onto us, invent history. What must still come economically, the necessary economic institutional change, is defined by Marx, but the new man, the leap, the power of love and of light, morality itself, has not yet been allotted to the desirable degree of autonomy in the definitive social order. Indeed, as Bloch emphasized in the first edition of The Spirit of Utopia, the Soviets, the Soviets in power in Russia were called upon to end not only, quote, every private economy, but also every money economy. And with this, quote, the mercantile morality that consecrates all that is most evil in a man. Together with economic power, it was power as such that must be questioned. In the final analysis, the quote, transformation of power into love must be accomplished. Walter Benjamin observed, quote, the modern economy, seen as a whole, resembles much less a machine that stands idle when abandoned by its stoker than a beast that goes berserk as soon as its tamer turns his back. In other words, it was not about making the quote machine of the economy more efficient or less devastating thanks to a revolutionary upheaval. Instead, it was about caging or perhaps annihilating that beast that, notwithstanding every socio-political transformation, continues to be the economy as such. So I guess yeah, they're trying to really tackle the entire problem of like the profit motive and why that drives so many people to do so many evil things to other people. And if it's all just people interacting, like why is this economic force driving people to such awful things? And then how do you combat that? And then also recognizing that like the USSR at that time being like the only socialist project, their task is to do away with not only that in their own territory, but like worldwide if they're going to claim that their thing can work. And so they're kind of tasked with an impossible goal. But that is the goal of global communism. Among the principal protagonists of the slaughter provoked by the imperialist competition was Russia, where after the October Revolution, there likewise spread a vision that looked with disdain at the economic world in its totality, and not incidentally, therefore, screamed at the scandal of the new economic policy, the NEP. Let's see how much time I got left on this one. So, I'm already at 40 minutes. I'm at 42 minutes. I'm way overdue on this one. I will just finish this paragraph here. The NEP, begun in 1921, followed on the heels of a, quote, war communism that brought an egalitarian but desperate and coerced asceticism. It is a very different vision from that just analyzed above regarding the West, and it was recalled by a Soviet Communist Party militant in the 1940s, quote, we young communists had all grown up believing that money was done away with once and for all, recalled one Bolshevik in the 1940s. If money was reappearing, wouldn't rich people reappear too? Weren't we on the slippery slope that led back to capitalism? Yeah. All right, so I'll bookmark it there. And then I'm going to switch over to. Do I not have that open? I guess I have to. Sorry, folks. Give me a second here. I thought I had that book open already. All right, so now I will switch over to the Busy Workers Handbook to the Apocalypse. Let me share my tab here. Okay. So now we're on to section 6.6, insurance. So again, this is the climate apocalypse, I guess, handbook, just like description of how the climate events are going to unfold over the next basically over the near future. Where are people viewing this from, by the way? It still says I have 3 viewers. I have no idea where they're at. Pop off in the chat if you're here, though. All right, so anyway, insurance is an easily overlooked but critically important factor to the stability of civilization. As Roger Howland put it recently, quote, "No insurance, no economy. All property values in the US are underpinned by disaster insurance. If a property is in a flood zone, fire zone, earthquake zone, etc., you must carry the relevant disaster insurance or you cannot get financing. If your property is deemed too high risk for insurance, no one is going to buy it because they will not be able to get financing. If insurers pull out of an area, the property values will tank, essentially becoming stranded assets. If businesses leave, then residents don't have jobs. It's yet another example of a fragile system with a clearly defined breaking point that, once passed, will cause tremendous cascading impacts." A new study finds homeowners insurance is becoming less available and less affordable in Colorado. The study by the Colorado Division of Insurance shows 76% of insurers decreased the number of Coloradans they cover last year. And over the last 3 years, the average insurance premium here has jumped nearly 52%. While some insurers are selectively canceling policies in high-risk areas, and many are considering mitigation when deciding whether to insure a property, the study says the problem isn't isolated to areas at high risk for wildfire. It found policies are being canceled and premiums are climbing across the state. Colorado has the third highest risk of wildfire and the second highest number of hail claims in the country. So this is another great black and white, actual economic and financial thing you can point to for people who either do not believe in climate change, like people who are just on the very far right, or people who believe that climate change is real but don't believe it's as bad as it is, to the extent that it actually is. You point to what is currently happening with insurance companies, insurers. That's one of the easiest things. There are constantly articles about them pulling out of entire areas because they are too disaster prone. The climate change is making it unprofitable for them to insure anyone. And then the people who still live there have their insurance rates climb, as was just described. They pay exorbitant amounts of money to stubbornly live in an area because they either don't want to abandon their asset, they can't get what they paid for it, they don't want to take a loss, or they're just emotionally committed to it somehow. Many such cases. So back to the book here. Climate change is destabilizing the insurance industry, driving up prices and pushing insurers out of higher risk markets. Climate change is injecting uncertainty into an industry built on risk prediction, and has created, quote, "a crisis of confidence around the ability to predict loss." Reinsurance companies, which help insurers pay catastrophic losses, quote, "have been withdrawing from high-risk areas around wildfire and flood in particular." Florida's state-run property insurer warned recently that Hurricane Ian had, quote, "significantly depleted its reserves," and that it might impose a surcharge on millions of policyholders in the state if another major hurricane generates massive claims. In California, the state-run FAIR Plan has accumulated a $332 million deficit, while it charges premiums that are too low and has limited reinsurance to cover claims from catastrophic wildfire. Okay, so they're literally just taking on debt to provide this affordable insurance that otherwise literally the market cannot bear. Growing risks from climate change and rising in reinsurance costs have caused insurers to raise premiums and pull out of markets, quote, "leaving homeowners with fewer choices, less protection, and more financial distress," Keyes said. Watkins said that when insurance companies stop selling policies in an area, it, quote, "can cause ripple effects that endanger entire communities and create a downward spiral that's difficult to emerge from. The spiral could occur gradually," Watkins said, "but it's possible for the weakened markets to collapse quickly through a crisis of confidence triggered by one event." And the emphasis added there, it's bolded. So yeah, that's a major problem. You can see how an area can become dilapidated, culturally dilapidated, or just physically dilapidated very quickly if it's emptied of people. If the insurers decide that is an area that they cannot make a profit on, and they pull out of an area, and then the businesses, like we described in the beginning of this section, the businesses leave, people don't have jobs, the property values decline. That's ghettoization. Is the sped up version of that. So back to the book here. California's growing wildfire risks have created challenges for its insurance markets in recent years, characterized by rising premiums and deductibles, declines in coverage, and sometimes even policy discontinuance. When homeowners are unable to obtain insurance through the private market, they can turn to the state's Fair Access to Insurance Requirements (FAIR) plan, a pool made up of all insurers authorized to operate in the state. Fair plan policies tend to be high cost and provide substantially less coverage than standard policies. For example, they typically do not offer liability coverage. Just those two fire seasons, 2017 and 2018 alone, decimated more than a quarter century's worth of underwriting profits for the California insurance market. That's crazy. So two summer fire seasons wiped out 25 years worth of profits for the insurance industry in California. That is as black and white as you can point to of an effect of climate change for the deniers, for the people who are like purely economical. They're just like right wing about it. Like, how does it get more obvious than that? White, in the video linked in the section 5.2, states at 37 minutes, quote, "The federal flood insurance program could become the largest entitlement program out there, larger than Social Security, larger than Medicare or Medicaid, given the trillions and trillions of dollars of assets we have on the coasts." And now also keep in mind, these are not like people who are just doling out money. Try to talk to anybody who has had their house destroyed by flood, hurricane, any kind of natural disaster. Ask them if they had an easy time getting compensated for that by either their insurance company, like a private insurance company, or if they had to resort to this FAIR program. Ask them if they had to jump through hoops, if it was easy for them to get this money, or if they had to like really be persistent about it. We know how insurance works. An insurance crisis following a series of major climate-related catastrophes such as fires and floods could very easily exceed the severity of the 2008 housing crash. It is not unthinkable that the U.S. could witness millions of internal refugees abandoning stranded assets in uninsurable cities. Yeah, that's how you have like those deserted towns, like the ghost towns. Like, people will just leave. People will take huge losses rather than just not survive entirely. It's that old thing like when Ben Shapiro said, well, if people's houses are getting enveloped in water, why wouldn't they just sell the houses? And the guy busts through the wall. And he's like, to who, Ben? Aquaman? Like, what are you talking about? So section 6.7 here, non-climate change related threats. Bill Rees is one of a number of climate scientists who portray climate science as one symptom of a larger planetary problem of ecological overshoot. In this excellent lecture, it's a link there, he briefly touches on ocean acidification, freshwater contamination, deforestation, soil erosion, desertification, overfishing, and species extinctions. A few key quotes at 26 minutes and 45. It's not just mammals. Wild bird populations are also tumbling. Domestic poultry now constitutes 70% of the world's avian biomass. Average populations of thousands of monitored species of wild vertebrates, birds, fish, mammals, amphibians have declined, 60% since 1970. Populations of invertebrates, including essential pollinators, are also in freefall. Butterflies down 53%, beetles down 49%, bumblebees down 46%. All species monitored by WWF are down 68 to 70% in just 50 years. Yeah. And that's a constant meme you see. People have just been sharing that one around for at least the last decade or so. I've been seeing it. And it's the top panel. It says 1970s, and it's a car with a whole bunch of bugs on its windshield. And then the 2020s, and it's like just not a lot of bugs on the windshield. There's just nowhere near as many bugs as there used to be. And anyone who's been alive for like a few decades and remembers will tell you. So at 46 minutes and 40, in coming years, there's no question the human enterprise will contract. Yeah, there's going to be a lot less people. 50 minutes and 20 seconds, with a 2-degree increase in mean global temperature, Israel will become uninhabitable. Oh, hell yeah, inshallah. This particular lecture was given at an Israeli university. Oh, damn. Well, that's annoying. At 50 minutes and 55 seconds, it may take some kind of micro catastrophe to wake enough people up to the fact that they themselves are threatened. See, another of our socially constructed myths is that our technology and our wealth will protect us from the worst consequences of this. In North America, we're being told that, oh, climate change may be happening, but it's happening over there to other people, and that appeals to another natural instinct of humans. We are natural discounters. Human beings prefer the here and now, and close relatives and friends to any distant place, total strangers, and merely possible future events. So even though science is telling us that this is what in the future is going to happen, we tend to displace that onto other people elsewhere, and hence we don't have to do much over here. We're self-delusionists. It had remarkably high survival value 10,000 years ago, but in rapidly changing circumstances, such as today, it becomes maladaptive. Yeah, that is literally the description of why people cannot even like wrap their minds around the reality and the severity of the climate crisis, let alone act in a way that would be sufficient to avoid any of its worst effects. Like we're just barreling straight on into it. It's actually wild. So continuing here, destruction of the oceans is far worse than just the direct acts of overfishing. This 2010 study found, quote, the recent dip in phytoplankton wasn't a passing phase. It had been happening in most parts of the ocean for more than a century. On average, the planet has lost 1% of its phytoplankton every year since 1900. Quote, you compound that over a century, this becomes a huge decline. Indeed, Worm's team estimates that phytoplankton numbers have plummeted 40% since 1950. What's more, the team found that phytoplankton numbers were more likely to dwindle in areas of the ocean that were warming, suggesting that climate change is responsible for the drop. The loss of phytoplankton is a huge problem for marine food chains, such as says worm, because every creature in the ocean either eats phytoplankton or eats other organisms that depend on it. If their numbers start to decrease, the populations of these species would drop as well. The rest of the food web would basically contract, he says. Even more chilling is the potential impact on our atmosphere. The ocean absorbs 40% of the CO2 humans emit. Phytoplankton, in turn, converts that CO2 into oxygen, or they die and bury it at the bottom of the ocean. Okay. If the phytoplankton are disappearing, Richardson says, the ocean as a carbon sink is declining, and what that means is ultimately more CO2 will stay in the atmosphere instead of being dissolved in the ocean. This 2015 NASA study confirmed the 1% year per year decline rate. So yeah, um, that's also something that people just don't tend to talk about. I think more in recent years, people are realizing they'll just generally attributed to algae. They just say like algae in the ocean are actually a much more uh, effective CO2 sink than even many of the trees on the land. Because people typically think of trees, turning the CO2 into oxygen, and algae is one of the most effective things. But to hear that it's dying at a rate of 1% per year, um, and of course, I can only imagine that that is one of those, uh, what do you call it, vicious cycles. Like the more it's dying off, the faster it starts dying off. So maybe 1% per year was the case, but I would not be surprised if we find out later on in this book or just soon that it's actually increasing the rate at which it's dying. And even if it is 1%, like that still is somewhat exponential. If you have 1% and then the amount that you have decreased by 1% every time, well, there's less of it every year. So, anyway, back to this. PFAS are a threat to drinking water supplies only now beginning to be studied and understood, with regulations lagging far behind. And lastly, we cannot ignore the threat of pandemics such as COVID. We have evidence that COVID harms reproductive health in addition to the acute and chronic risks of death and disability. This 2021 study found, quote, a consistent association between pregnant individuals with COVID-19 diagnosis and higher rates of adverse outcomes, including maternal mortality, preeclampsia, and preterm birth compared with pregnant individuals without COVID-19 diagnosis. This 2013 article reports finding COVID, quote, in fetal brain tissue in instances of pregnant people passing the infection to their children, including increased occurrence of brain hemorrhages. Each of these threats are worth their own in-depth investigations, and I will not attempt to fully expound upon them here. The point is to highlight how astronomically foolish the IPCC's fantasy of strip mining the entire planet for copper and lithium is. Even in an alternate reality where that was feasible, we still would be facing near-term extinction due to all the other planetary destruction that is not included in discussions of climate change. The standard assumption that, quote, tech will save us, there's no need to overthrow capitalism, is insanity beyond insanity, hubris beyond hubris. Let's see how far I am. I know I only have, I'm at 59 minutes. Okay. Well, then I will just, I will leave it at that section for today. So that was the insurance section. That was section 6.6. And now we're into section 7, which will be real scenarios. So I imagine this will start to get a lot more interesting. The subsection, section 7.1, is who is at the wheel. Section 7.2 is on a knife edge. Here it says summer 2024 is going to be bad. Worse than anything we've ever seen. It will shock the world. So yeah, we are now in approaching, this is June of 13th, 2025, and we're getting into summer 2025. So we'll see if this one shocks the world. It seems like there's other things going on that are more apt to shock people. I say this the day after Israel just started bombing Iran. It was actually like a pretty cataclysmic event. I mean, it's an impactful event. This is not one of those nothing ever happens kind of weeks. Like, things are very much happening. So I do wonder if summer 2025 will shock people because of climate events or for other man-made reasons. But anyway, that will be the stream for today. Sorry, I'm banned on the TikTok one, but I'm trying to get that back. Instagram doesn't seem to be popping off too much. Trying to get people to jump on. What's up, Adult Crash? Just saw you in the chat now. Sorry. So yeah, whatever platform you guys are watching on, I appreciate it. Say something in the chat. Say hi. But come back tomorrow or another day. I guess Monday I'll probably pick this back up. But I'll try to do it again soon regardless. And if you haven't seen them already, just look for the archive of the live streams and the reading hours on the YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@TCOTpod or TCOTEpod. It stands for True Crimes of the Empire. So just look for that anywhere, or just Google True Crimes of the Empire. You'll find all the different socials and look for these live streams to catch up on the reading hour. And you can find the links